Listen, God gave me a word tonight, and the word tonight is I love God, no cap. Say that with me. I love God, no cap. I love God, no cap. Who knows what no cap means? It means I ain't lying. It means I'm telling the truth. Andy, you know what no cap means, right? No cap. Because your neighbor's wearing a cap, but you ain't wearing a cap. So you no cap right now. Dad joke. Let's go. Starting the night off right. Slow clap. Thank you, my guy. Listen, I love God, no cap. What does that mean? That means I love God, and I ain't lying. I love God, and I'm not afraid to tell you. I love God, and I love him boldly. Like, I'm going to live for God. Tonight, I want to let you know up front, very beginning, this is going to be a different night. Tonight, we're gonna talk about how we love God, and we need to love God boldly, but we're also going to get into a time of worship. I want to let you know that during that time of worship, I'm ready, and I'm ready to see people go ahead and truly give their lives to God. I'm ready to see lives completely transformed. I believe that tonight, God's going to call some of y'all to let go of some of the things you've been holding on to. God's going to go ahead and set you free from some of the addictions that you've been carrying in your life. I believe that God's going to do something so crazy tonight that you're not going to leave the same person you came in as. Does anybody believe with me tonight that God's going to do something in here in Transformation Youth? Come on. Listen. I love God, no cap. Okay, so I want to talk to you about this guy named Peter. And it starts in Luke chapter 22, verses 54 through 62. This dude named Peter, right? So Peter's one of the disciples. He's one of the 12, right? He's a guy who loves Jesus. He loves Jesus. He says, Jesus, I love you so much. Jesus tells Peter, hey, before the rooster crows 3 times, you're going to deny me. Before the rooster crows 3 times, you're going to deny me. Peter's like, no way. No way. You capping, God. He's like, you capping, Jesus. You know what I'm saying? There's no way I'm going to ever deny you. Well, here we go. Luke chapter 22 says this, then seizing him, they led him away and took him into the house of the high priest. This means that they were taking, like Jesus was already like arrested. Like we're getting into the part of the Bible where it talks about Jesus going ahead and dying on the cross for us. And you see, it says this, it says, then seizing him, they led him away and took him into the house of the high priest. Peter followed at a distance. And when some there had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and had sat down together, Peter sat down with them. A servant girl saw him seated there in the firelight. She looked closely at him and said, this man was with him. This man was with Jesus. She says, this man was with him. But he denied it. The woman said, I don't know him, he said. He says, woman, I don't know him. He said, a little later, someone else saw him and said, you also are one of them, one of Jesus' followers. He says, you're also one of them. He says, man, I am not, Peter replied. About an hour later, another asserted, certainly this fellow was with him, for he is a Galilean. Peter replied, man, I don't know what you're talking about. Just as he was speaking, the rooster crowed. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word that the Lord had spoken to him. Before the rooster crows today, you will disown me 3 times. And he went outside and wept bitterly. He disowned Christ 3 times. Disowned Jesus, the person who he grew to know personally. He saw Jesus. He walked with Jesus. He knew Jesus, and yet he disowned Jesus 3 times. Transformation Youth, I'm here to tell you today that we need to own Christ because Christ owned us. We need to own Christ because Christ owned us. See, what does that mean? That means we boldly live out our faith. We own Christ because Christ owned us. I'm talking about we represent Christ because on the cross, Jesus represented us. I'm saying that we own Christ because he took up a cross for you, because he owned you, because he knew you, because he loved you. I'm saying today we have to own Christ because Christ owned us. You see, Peter denies Christ as Christ is about to carry a cross that represents Peter's sin. He denies Christ as Christ is carrying a cross that resembles Peter's sin. And he denied Christ out of fear of persecution. He denied Christ because he was worried that he would go ahead and also be crucified. He denied Christ because he was worried about what people would say and what people would do. And here's Jesus, the most perfect person ever, and he's about to die, and Peter's worried about his own life. See, maybe you don't know exactly what Christ did for you. So I want to go ahead and explain really quick. So in John 3:16, it says, "For God so loved the world that he sent his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life." You see, what does that mean? God so loved the world? No. God so loved you. God loved you. I want you to know, front row, right there, you, God loved you. God loved you, Boyle. God loved you. God loved you. God loved every single person sitting in here tonight so much that before you were ever even growing in your mother's womb, Jesus died for you. God sent his Son to die for you. 2,000 years before you were ever even born or ever even a thought that your parents had, Jesus died for you. You see, we need to love God with no shame, no cap. Come on. We need to love God with no shame. We need to go ahead and be able to walk into our school and say, I love God. I'm a Christian. I don't like how people today, they don't like to go ahead and talk about their love for Jesus. They don't like to talk about what God's done. See, a lot of you in here right now today might be praying to God for a lot of problems to be answered and resolved, but yet at the same time, you're not willing to tell your friends who you're praying to. Like you're wanting God to answer your prayers, but you don't want to go ahead and even tell your friends who you're praying to, who's answering those prayers. You see, Christ owned us, so we need to own him. How do you represent Christ? How do you represent Christ when you're at your school or during that football game or while you're playing video games and you got the headset on? How are you representing Christ? How do you represent Christ when your non-Christian friends ask you about your faith or when they make a dirty joke or when they offer you temptation? How do you represent Christ when you're all alone? How do you represent Christ when you think nobody else is watching? How do you think you represent Christ when you're doing that thing that you think you're not going to get caught doing? How are you representing Christ in all moments in 2020? See, we need to own Christ because Christ owned us. He loves us.